So this is going to be a full-on Q&A session, and then we'll have one last open public comment session should anybody choose to do so. So in the order across the stage, I want to introduce Rosemary Menard, Water Director for the City of Santa Cruz. Rick Rogers, who is the District Manager for the San Lorenzo Valley Water District. Perrette Harmon, who is the General Manager for the Scotts Valley Water District. And lastly, John Ricker, Water Resources Division Director for the County of Santa Cruz. These are the managers of these agencies that are directly engaged in delivering water and procuring water and storing water and all the above. So they have been given a set of the cards, so I'm just going to let them go. So you guys figure out who's going first, and then I'll be collecting more cards here.
Okay, so I have a question here, and then I'm going to pass it. We'll just do one at a time, okay? This is really a softball, so I'll start with that. In terms of overall water usage statewide, what percent of water is used by agriculture? The answer is like 85%. And what percent is used in urban areas? It's probably not all of it, the rest, but pretty darn close to the rest. So 12 to 15%.
Thank you. The crowd looks a lot different from up here. That's for sure. If we are using less water, why are we not sustainable already? Well, speaking in the San Lorenzo Valley Water District, we are sustainable, but there's other impacts. There's obviously the drought, there's fisheries. The SLV water uses roughly 50% surface water and 50% well water annually. Technology with filtration has allowed us to use more well water, more surface water in the winter with filtration, which has been great, and allows our well fields to rest. But we still have fisheries, coho salmon, bypass. We have a lot of other things that come into play when we look at our water sustainability that we have to worry about. And obviously, drought is our biggest concern. Because roughly around May, June, the district switches from its surface water over to well water because of the impact to surface water. So we may be at sustainability, but we still have planning. We still have to continue to plan and work with the other agencies and the other requirements. We're not the only ones that use the surface water or the water in the San Lorenzo Valley.
So I have a couple of cards here that kind of go back to the numbers specific to Scotts Valley area in terms of growth. Is it 1,000? Is it 3,000? Is it 0? Or the AMBAG number? Those all projections. And the previous presenters, they talked about that how often and for what reason all of those plans have to be reevaluated, because we're doing our best at that time. The previous AMBAG was done at the time of, because by the time the report comes out, it's been a couple of years working through the numbers and getting those numbers. That was in the middle of the recession. So knowing what people knew then is they tried to come up with the best projections, best guess, and then that's the reason that we go back. So Taylor mentioned 1994 Scotts Valley General Plan had a full build out at 15,000. As a water supplier, I would venture using those numbers at the most conservative. So if we're prepared for 15,000, we are prepared for anything under that. But that's a long planning horizon. Even now, planning for the next 10 years, that is, I think all of us can comfortably say maybe 10 years we know what's coming beyond that. It's going to be very different, considering climate change, considering the per capita water use and supply side of it. We all constantly working as a water suppliers, not only dealing with the demand side, but also looking for how can we have more diversified portfolio of water, how can we have more resiliency in the system considering the climate change and considering that we are on our own in this county. We don't get any imported water. So there's a lot of things that go into that, and they change all the time. And we do work very closely with the city planning department trying to understand what the changes are and how they impact water supply management.
I've got a, excuse me, a number of cards that ask the question about groundwater recharge. We've been talking primarily about the impacts of development on water supply demand. But recharge is another impact, a significant impact of development that's happened in this watershed. Recharge is essentially the rainfall falls on the ground, percolates through the soil. A lot of it gets taken up by the plants, but what's left percolates on down into the aquifer and into storage. That's where our water in our groundwater basin comes from, is from recharge. Doesn't come from the Sierra, doesn't come from anywhere else. It's just what comes into our basin and is able to percolate down. When we develop an area, particularly the very sandy soils that we see in the Santa Margarita Basin, we lose that recharge, both by paving it over and then just by constructing roadways that intercept the runoff or may intercept the interflow and channel it to the streams. So the development really does result in a significant loss of recharge if it's not mitigated. The estimate from our groundwater model is that we may have lost 500 to 1,000 acre feet of annual recharge on average in this basin as a result of parking lots, paved surfaces, roadways, and that sort of thing where we have paved over our primary recharge areas. The good news is that we recognize that impact. We won't be seeing that with new development, not only but the county, the city of Scotts Valley, and the state regulations now require that for any new development or any redevelopment, that the water runoff be maintained at pre-development levels and the infiltration rates be maintained at pre-development levels. So essentially we're now required to make sure that new development does have a means to capture and infiltrate the runoff rather than just having it go into the stream and off into the ocean. We've also done a number of efforts to try to recover some of that lost recharge. Several projects have been done in Scotts Valley, at the library, at the Metropolitan Center parking lot, and at one of the new developments up along Scotts Valley Drive to essentially put in facilities that capture the runoff, filter it, and then put it back into the ground where we have lost it in the past. So we will be looking at that as we go forward, ways to make sure that we do as much recharge as we can, and particularly going forward. That's another potential impact of climate change. The USGS estimated that our recharge rates, we may lose 30% of our recharge by 2100 just because of the greater intensity of rainfall, more runoff, and also a lot more evapotranspiration. There'll be a lot more deficit in the soil that will suck up that initial water before it can reach the basin. So recharge is definitely something that we're going to be looking at as we move forward with this plan.
Let me throw a related, since there was a card that came in from the audience right now, and since you're already on the theme, and I know you all know about the new move towards what we call FloodMAR or FMAR, Flood Managed Aquifer Recharge. So this question is somewhat related to that. What are the current discussions about aquifer recharge with rain or river overflow, and what are the regulations about cleaning the water before putting it in, like the state board regs? So leapfrogging off of what John was just talking about, anybody want to talk about that, as well as discussions at the agency, even at this stage, about recharge?
Is it on? Okay, now it's on. Can you hear me now? I can't sing, so I'm not going to do what Dave did. So I think the one thing that we're looking at, and I think lots of you know, we're looking at using available flow during the winter season when we have good rain years to capture that flow and then store it in the ground to create drought resiliency for the Santa Cruz system, and potentially in partnership with others to the extent that that can work. And I think that for us, because we're thinking it's not just lay it on the ground and let it sink in, but there's some injection strategies. You have to clean the water to drinking water standards, or potentially, depending on, but it's probably to drinking water standards is what we're talking about. So that's what we're thinking about there. I know there are a whole other series of sort of FloodMAR, sort of managed aquifer recharge kinds of strategies that are being explored in the county. The RCD is working on several things, and maybe John or someone else wants to comment on those.
Floodmar, in sort of its narrow sense, is looking at floodwaters along rivers and trying to have it spread over the floodplain and soak into the ground. That's probably not going to work so well in our area. Our river channels are relatively narrow, and when we have flood periods, that area is pretty much saturated. The water's already full to the top, so there's really no place for the floodwaters to go. Where we're looking at managed aquifer recharge, which is where the MAR comes in, is more up in the upland areas where we have places that we can capture water. In terms of treatment, we run it right now through a bioswale where you get filtration and cleaning by the roots and the surface soils, and then let it recharge. So there is both a treatment component as well as a discharge. Again, this is stormwater. It's not really floodwaters, it's more the storms that happen on a more regular, frequent basis that we can capture that water and get it and provide the means for it to soak into the ground.
I don't know if you'd sort of lumped them together and just, or have other ones. Go ahead.
So I have one that asks about the districts in the Sigma, working on Sigma, which I assume includes the city just as an engaged party. How does our conservation compare to other areas in California and nationwide? And I guess what I would say is we have one of the lowest per capita demands in the state in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz Water Department does. Really all of the jurisdictions in Santa Cruz County. That a lot of things affect that. One of them is fairly significant and longstanding water conservation programs that have happened programmatically, not just in response to drought. One of the things that we're doing in Santa Cruz that I think is being done in some other places is retrofit on resale. As just as an example, when a piece of property turns over, that property has to be retrofit to the current standards of water efficient fixtures, which is a way to catch up and not just wait and let all this housing stock sit around until somebody's toilet breaks and they have to get a new one. Another thing is the characteristics of our in Santa Cruz in particular, we tend to have smaller lot sizes. The seasonality of our water use tends to vary somewhat dramatically based on kind of a rainy year we have. So all these things kind of affect the per capita consumption. But Toby mentioned in his talk that the goal is 55 gallons per day. I think that Santa Cruz's current water consumption for residential on a per capita basis is 46. And that's come up just a tiny bit from when the drought restrictions were on in 2014 and 15, but it's been pretty stable now for about 5 years.
I have one that is, what about them? I think that them is people who do not live here. How does job growth outside of Santa Cruz County impact growth in Scotts Valley? And how do we deal with their share of putting stress on this basin? One thing that that is not maybe well known, or even if people know it, they might not want to admit it, is in the state of California, the state owns all of the waters. As much as we like to think about water, that it's ours and it's mine and it's right here and I live here and I have by that greater right to that. It is very emotional, it's very personal, our connection with water, but by state law, state owns all of the water. What we have right to use it. We have right to put it to beneficial use, not to waste it. And the beneficial use is personal use, but also extends over to environment. And so I think that's one of the reasons that we see state taking more strenuous steps in kind of telling us or convincing us or giving us tools or the carrot and the stick is how we should be doing that. So many of those rules and requirements and policies state thinks that every single person who lives and works in the state of California has equal rights, human right to the water, the same way as we have right to the air. And with air, we don't really question it. I mean, it's up there, it's in the air, it moves around. and we all breathe it. So we don't draw lines in the air. We tend to do that on the ground much more, but the same is true about water. It is temporarily residing within our jurisdiction, but then it becomes a runoff. It goes into the ocean, it goes up in the sky and comes down maybe right here, maybe not. Maybe it you know, rains down in Santa Cruz and it's my water to start through, so how come they have it now? So the 3,000 people in Scotts Valley, we are not also tracking, you know, where they're coming from. We haven't built a wall yet. We are not telling people they shouldn't come here. Water districts don't deal with number of houses or even number of people. What is our metric is gallons or acre feet. We deal with the equation of water budget, and that's something you'll be learning next time, is the in and out and how can we maximize the efficiencies around it. A slice we haven't touched yet is water districts have a percentage of water that we call unaccounted for, and we're really trying to understand where does it go and how big percentage of our total pumping and production and supply is unaccounted for, to make that part more efficient. Would it be water leaks? Is it something that we just don't know exactly where it is? So we can all do better. So that over the hill impacts us, but I don't know that it impacts us any more or less than it ever has. And it kind of all comes down to the budgets that you hear next time.
Got a question for Rick. How can you say San Lorenzo Valley Water District is at sustainability if we can't meet demands during drought years? Where does Fall Creek water come from, and is it part of the Santa Margarita Basin?
Well, Fall Creek, one of the issues that we will be looking at, and we're looking at conjunctive use, is the town of Felton. The town of Felton, when we consolidated, it has an unusual water rights permit that tied to other flows in the San Lorenzo River during summer demand. One of our problems is that we cannot meet that requirement. And the requirement basically states when the San Lorenzo River hits a certain level that we're supposed to not withdraw any water from Fall Creek surface sources, and that's Fall Creek, Bennett Creek, and Bull. So one of our goals is to correct that, whether it's with conjunctive use, whether we use more surface water at times and then bring it back on our well field, the town of Felton, possibly use the Loch Lomond allotment, but we're trying to and work with the regulatory agencies eventually to clean that up and to be in compliance. I don't think, you can't look at the drought as a controlling factor. There's a lot there besides the drought, and the fisheries, we could lose our surface water right to the San Lorenzo River in the summertime for fisheries. Cal Fish and Wildlife are looking closely at our procedures and what we remove from our surface sources, which are far in the main stem of the San Lorenzo River, the tributaries. We don't take any water out of the San Lorenzo River, but all of our tributaries flow into the San Lorenzo River. So we've embarked on a study for over the last 3 years of monitoring temperatures, flows in the San Lorenzo River to see what our impact is. It'll take some time yet to figure out what the results of all this is, but there's a possibility that Fish and Wildlife says maybe you have to bypass 50% of your water, 10%, 100% at certain times. We're not sure. So, I believe we have water. We also have the Loch Lomond allotment that we haven't used since I think 75 or 78, somewhere in there. That's roughly 300 acre feet that this district could fall back on, and we'll be planning to be able to use that water. Right now, we do not have a treatment facility, so it's not like you could just turn on a switch and start using that water. But we are looking at that as a future water source. So And plus with conjunctive use and the abilities with our treatment facilities to use more water, more surface water in the winter times when it's available, rest our well fields, I believe that we are in a good position. Yes, we do request water conservation during the drought years because we don't know what's going to happen next year. Is it going to be worse? If the drought goes on for year, just like we were talking earlier this morning, we may have some issues. But the planning that we're doing now, hopefully, will address that as best as possible. There is only so much water, and we do have to manage it. And what we're doing with the Santa Margarita is hopefully ensuring that that water's there when we need it, and all working together. Which I think the San Lorenzo Valley Water District with conjunctive use is in a really good position. Yeah, we do have issues, but we're still, I think, we're in a good position.
John, do you have another question already queued up? There's one that was here, but if you've got one, go for it.
I do have another one. It's sort of a bit of a flip on the recharge question. The county has a policy to protect primary groundwater recharge areas. It's actually been in the general plan since 1980 and continues to be in the general plan. We mapped all the primary groundwater recharge areas back at that time, the areas that had good permeable soils that contributed to water percolating into the underlying aquifers. And we have a 10-acre minimum for new land divisions within groundwater recharge areas. The idea was to not have dense development over those recharge areas and not to allow parcels to be split below 10 acres in size. And the question is asking, well, could there be other ways to mitigate the impacts on recharge so that those parcels could be divided down to smaller levels to allow potentially more development, more housing in the valley? The answer to that is, there's the potential to consider that. The issue with mitigating recharge through, say, infiltration devices, capturing water and putting it in the ground is that infrastructure often fails after time. So if you do have higher density development, you can mitigate it on a short term, but you have to maintain the infrastructure and you may lose that infrastructure. So it's really a question for the community in terms of how do you balance your various needs for, say, housing versus protection of your recharge areas.
SLV, do you have a major forest fire response plan regarding runoff facilities, repair, protection, things like that?
No, we do not. We are in the process of working on that, environmental is, but today we do not have that.
Yeah.
So I think that the forest fires that have occurred in California over the last several years and the situation going on with the vegetation, the tree mortality in the Sierras has really been a big eye opener for water utilities in general about the vulnerability of some of their watershed lands and reservoir lands to the impacts of forest fires. And I will just say that the city of Santa Cruz is definitely paying a lot of attention to that issue. We were working very aggressively with CAL FIRE and Santa Cruz Fire. We recently replaced one of the bridges inside the Loch Lomond Mill Creek Reserve area to make sure that we could have access for fire equipment across the spillway, that the former bridge wasn't adequate to carry that load. But I think at the end of the day, this is a huge issue, and I know that we're all looking at how to mitigate and plan for mitigation of the potential for out of control wildfires that we've seen around the state.
And I can just very quickly add to that, just because this would be of interest to many of you. There have been a couple slides, and a couple of the presenters spoke about the framework for making conservation a way of life in the state of California. The most recent pieces of legislation were Assembly Bill 1668 and Senate Bill 606, and it's been this succession of pieces of conservation. And this most recent piece of legislation, there is a very specific mandate to the Department of Water Resources. We're actually working on it right now. I work with this group. One of the things that's learned is these communities that fall below the trigger for urban water management planning areas, which is below 3,000 units or highly ruralized area. And there's a recognition at the state that the state quite literally doesn't understand. Like they literally don't understand what happens to these unique impacts of highly ruralized areas when they shut water off, when they can't deliver water because infrastructure is damaged from a fire, when you've got families in rural areas that are quite literally in subsistence farming and they're told they can't they can't water their gardens anymore. These are ongoing conversations at the state level to continue to learn and continue coming with better systems. Rosemary, there was another question here. I'm gonna go like one or two more questions, and then we're gonna go to closeout. So, why? Okay, it's a you statement, but I'm reading it as this. Why are you not working with the Soquel Creek Water District to develop a plan to recycle 100% of the wastewater? The Santa Cruz Water District's current plan is going to cost 150 million to recycle only 15% and cannot be expanded. Do you want to field that one now, or do you want to go
Sure.
offline?
I'll just say that the Water Supply Advisory Committee process that happened between April of 2014 and October of 2015 laid out a plan for us to look at a whole range of alternatives. Recycling is one of them. Desal was one of them. We recently in November met with the council to put desal on the sort of the back burner, not to take it off the table completely, but to deprioritize it. And so the two big options we're looking at are recycled water in some kind of indirect potable reuse, which is sort of similar to the Pure Water Soquel project, and a water supply augmentation strategy using winter flows. And right now, the big focus is on continuing the evaluation of winter flows. We're going to be starting to pilot test aquifer storage and recovery using water from our treatment plant into the Belt water system, the groundwater system in the Live Oak area that the city uses. And we're certainly not off the table, but so I wouldn't say we're not working with them. I would just say we have our own process that was laid out and the council adopted and directed us to implement in November of 2015. And we expect to be having a decision on what our supplemental supply option looks like in about a year and a half.
Were there any other outstanding questions that you all had that didn't get fielded?
We'd just like to follow up on fire. We haven't worked specifically on fire. We're starting to work specifically on fire. I think we're working with the Safe Fire Council and some others. But what we have done, we have worked to strengthen our distribution system by partnering up with Scotts Valley Water, Mount Herman Water, Felton, San Lorenzo Valley North, and Lompico with interties to be used during emergencies that we can move large amounts of water from district to district. They're bidirectional emergency interties that were installed that would be used in case of fire or any of our districts. They're pretty much automatic. They come on and we can move large amounts of water from one district to another. And that was a major project. The price tag, Scotts Valley was the lead agency. I think it was like 9 million or 7 million was the total, something like that, total cost of the projects. They have been completed and they are in operation. And that's a major backbone to the San Lorenzo Valley and Scotts Valley.
All right, I'm going to do one last question, and then we're going to go to closeout. I believe this would go to Rosemary. Please discuss water availability to supply those 750 new building permit applications that Ms. Fleming described.
So I said this in this couple of the table right here. The additional demand from growth in our service area, and Toby made the comment that our demand is flat, even with about 20,000 new connections over the next 20 years. In fact, it's declining slightly. And so for us, it's not new growth that is driving the need to address water supply reliability issues. It is the reliability for our existing customers. The variability graphic that he showed you indicated that we have, one of our big challenge is that we have just huge variability and we don't have enough storage to meet the needs, the reliability needs, the adequate water supply needs of our existing customers. And so the comment I made was, and I've made this publicly in other places, if you want to manage Santa Cruz's water supply based on population control, then anyone who was not living here in our service area when Richard Nixon was president ought to leave now.
Okay, well, on that note, moving right along. Okay. All right, let's give a hand to our panel, please, okay? All right, we are just about done, so just hang with us for just a few more minutes. First of all, you guys are troopers. Give yourselves a hand, okay? You hung out the whole day. There, if you didn't get one already, I mean, it's you earned them today. This is the water champion. These are sort of like, hey, these are cool, but now I'm like, yeah, you guys really earned these things. So if you didn't get a sticker, a Santa Margarita Groundwater Basin Water Champion sticker, get one. Put it on your coffee mug, your children's heads, whatever you want to do with them. I want to thank the AV team. Okay, they've been quietly sort of sitting here and filming this thing so that. Yeah, so that this is going to be available, and all the other meetings are going to be available as a matter of record. And as again, like I said, the video is going to be available on January 25th. I want to acknowledge, there's that term, it takes a village, okay? It takes a village to put on a meeting like this, okay? It takes a village of all the presenters that came today who have day jobs, and then they get a phone call from this annoying facilitator from Sacramento who's like, hey, you think you could throw a presentation together? And every one of them dove right in, and I think that they did a great job, so please give them a hand. I was just kind of curious, but I meant to sort of ask this earlier, just curiosity. How many folks in here are Scotts Valley folks? How many folks from Scotts Valley? Okay, how many folks are San Lorenzo Valley folks? Wow, neat. Okay, cool. Right on. And from how many folks? I was getting there. How many folks are from Santa Cruz? All right, that's where we got to do our work then, right? So, okay. And then unincorporated county. How many are from unincorporated county? I'm just glad you guys know. All right. Again, these are not in any particular order. If you feel the need to get in touch with me, by all means do so. Okay, I'm working with this group. If you want to give me feedback on this session, things that you didn't like that I did, which is completely fine, let me give you my email address. Okay, it's the first initial. It's Dave Ceppos, so it's DCEPPOS, the Sam. So DCEPP, like pepper, OS, like Sam, at CSUS, like California State University Sacramento, .edu. So altogether, dceppos at csus.edu. If you've got any feedback you want to give me offline, that's great. Related to that, I have confirmation from Perrette that sometime, maybe by Tuesday or so, if you go and check the Groundwater Agency website, we're going to have a online comment ability for you to come and give us feedback on today's session, things that we can try to do differently for the next session, improve on, keep the same, however, any feedback you want to give us. There is still food in the back room, so unless you want staff to have bagels and fruit, by all means, help yourself as you're heading out the door. I'm going to leave you with this last comment. I think it's been pretty well evidenced, and at the risk of getting a little heavy, if I may, or not, hopefully not, but let me just go there. I think it's already been evidenced, and I applaud you all. I was very impressed, for whatever that's worth, by the feedback in the second round of breakout sessions. There were a number of comments about an awareness of working together, sort of sharing resources, things like that. And it was said many times today, and it is really legitimate, that one of the all laws are difficult, and SGMA is no different than anything else. But SGMA has, I do water policy for a living, and SGMA has vested a higher degree of local control to these brand new agencies than any other prior policy piece that I've ever seen. There's a lot, these guys have heard me say this before, SGMA has very few shalls and lots of mays. Okay? It has a lot of range for what the local agency, with your feedback, can do. But one of the things that it's going to take, and some people talked to this already, is that water is an emotional thing for very legitimate reasons. It is the lifeblood. All the cliches aside, it quite literally is, but it takes a community. We have choices of how we can have those conversations. I live in Davis. When I leave today, I'm going back to Davis. Maybe some of you heard about what happened in Davis the other night. We have to work as a community. I knew Natalie. You're going to have choices in this community about how you're going to handle things that are really emotional, like water. We can have meetings like this, and I applaud you for having this meeting like this, and that's what it's going to take. These kinds of conversations, honest conversations, disagreeing when you disagree, but doing it in a civil way. So I hope you had a good time today. I hope you learned a lot. Hug your family, be a community. We're adjourned.